The bus rattled down the dusty road, carrying Rebecca Mitchell toward a future she couldn't yet imagine. She pressed her hand against her swollen belly, feeling the baby kick beneath her worn cotton dress. 6 months pregnant and completely alone. The year was 1952, and she was heading to Crow's Ridge, Wyoming, a town so small it barely showed up on the map. Rebecca had chosen this place for exactly that reason. Nobody knew her here. Nobody knew her story. And maybe, just maybe, she could start fresh where the whispers of her past couldn't follow. The bus driver called out her stop and she gathered her single battered suitcase. Everything she owned fit in that one bag. As she stepped off the bus, the hot September sun beat down on her shoulders. Main Street stretched before her, a handful of shops, a church with a white steeple and curious eyes already turning her way. She'd seen an advertisement in a newspaper back in Colorado. The general store in Crow's Ridge needed a seamstress. The pay wasn't much, but it came with the promise of steady work. Rebecca had always been good with a needle and thread. Her mother had taught her before she died, back when life still made sense. The general store sat at the corner of Main and 3rd. A bell jangled as she pushed open the door. The owner, Mr. Patterson, looked up from his ledger. He was a round man with spectacles that sat low on his nose. "You the seamstress from the advertisement?" he asked, his eyes dropping briefly to her belly before snapping back to her face. "Yes, sir. Rebecca Mitchell. I sent a letter 2 weeks ago." Mr. Patterson nodded slowly. "You did, and in that letter you mentioned you were recently widowed." Rebecca's cheeks burned. The lie sat heavy on her tongue, but she nodded. "Yes, sir. My husband. He passed 3 months ago." It was easier than the truth. Easier than explaining how she'd fallen in love with a man who swore he'd marry her. How she'd believed every sweet word until she was already carrying his child. How she'd discovered, quite by accident, that he had a wife and 3 children back in Pennsylvania. He'd been traveling for business, he said. But his business was breaking hearts. Mr. Patterson studied her for a long moment. Rebecca held her breath. She needed this job desperately. The little money she'd saved was nearly gone. "The room above the hardware store next door is vacant," he finally said. "Rent's $5 a month. I can take it out of your wages if you need. You'll work 6 days a week mending and sewing. Some alterations, some custom orders. Can you handle that in your condition?" "Yes, sir. I can work right up until the baby comes. And after, too. I'm strong. All right, then. You start tomorrow morning." 8 o'clock sharp. Relief flooded through her. "Thank you, Mr. Patterson. You won't regret this." But as the days turned into weeks, Rebecca realized that finding work was only the first battle. The real war was with the town itself. The women of Crow's Ridge had eyes like hawks and tongues like knives. They noticed everything. They noticed that Rebecca wore no wedding ring. They noticed she never mentioned her late husband's name. They noticed she received no letters, no visitors, no sign that anyone in the world cared whether she lived or died. At first, the whispers were quiet. Rebecca would catch fragments as she walked to work. That new girl, no family, mighty convenient. But she kept her head down and focused on her sewing. The church ladies were the worst. Mrs. Henderson, the midwife who also led the women's prayer circle, made it her personal mission to uncover Rebecca's secrets. She'd come into the store pretending to browse fabric while asking pointed questions. "Where did you say your husband was from, dear? What church did you attend back in Colorado? Isn't it unusual for a widow to move so far from her husband's family?" Rebecca answered as little as possible, her needle flying through the fabric in her hands. She'd learned that silence was safer than lies. By her 7th month, the whispers had grown louder. The truth had a way of revealing itself in a small town. Someone had written to a friend in Colorado, asking about a Mitchell family. The response came back clear. No record of any Rebecca Mitchell or her deceased husband. The scandal spread like wildfire. Women who had smiled politely at her now crossed the street to avoid her. When she entered the general store each morning, conversation stopped. The church ladies began refusing her service. At the bakery and the butcher shop, Mrs. Henderson announced loudly at the post office that she'd been right all along. That girl was unwed and carrying a child in sin. Rebecca felt the shame settle over her like a heavy cloak. She'd known it would be hard, but she hadn't expected this level of cruelty. Still, she had no choice but to endure. Where else could she go? What else could she do? She found a small room above the hardware store, just as Mr. Patterson had promised. It wasn't much, just a bed, a chair, a small stove, and a window that looked out over the alley. But it was hers. She hung a thin curtain for privacy and began preparing for the baby's arrival. With her meager wages, she bought second-hand baby clothes and diapers. She traded sewing work for a wooden cradle from the carpenter. Every evening, after her work at the store was done, she'd sit in her little room and sew tiny gowns and blankets, imagining the child she'd soon hold. The baby kicked stronger now, reminding her why she was enduring all of this. Her child deserved a chance at life, even if that life started in scandal. The isolation was the hardest part. Rebecca had always been social, always had friends, but now the only people who spoke to her were Mr. Patterson, who kept their conversations strictly about work, and old Henry at the hardware store below, who was too deaf to hear the gossip anyway. On Sundays, she stayed in her room while the church bells rang. She wasn't welcome there, though she prayed plenty on her own. She prayed for strength. She prayed for her baby. And sometimes, in her loneliest moments, she prayed that someone, somewhere, might show her a small kindness. The autumn air grew colder, and Rebecca's belly grew larger. She altered her 2 dresses to fit her changing body, letting out seams and adding panels. She couldn't afford new clothes for herself. Every penny was saved for the baby. One evening, as she climbed the stairs to her room, she overheard Mrs. Henderson talking to another woman on the street below. "That child will be a bastard," Mrs. Henderson said, her voice carrying in the quiet evening air. "Born in sin and marked for life. No decent family will let their children play with him. He'll carry that shame forever." Rebecca's hand went to her belly, tears stinging her eyes. She'd thought she could protect her child by coming here, by starting over, but the scandal had followed her anyway, or rather she'd brought it with her. That night, as she lay in bed feeling her baby move, Rebecca made a silent promise. She would love this child enough for 2 parents. She would work herself to the bone to provide, and somehow, some way, she would give her baby the best life she possibly could, regardless of what the world thought. She had no idea that her prayers for kindness were about to be answered in a way she never could have imagined, or that a quiet cowboy with a kind heart was about to change everything. The bell above the general store door chimed on a Thursday morning, and Rebecca looked up from the shirt she was hemming. A tall man stood in the doorway, his silhouette framed by the bright sunlight behind him. He removed his dusty hat as he stepped inside, and Rebecca got her first clear look at him. He was probably in his early 30s, with sun-weathered skin and dark hair that needed a trim. His clothes were worn but clean, the practical attire of a working ranch hand. But it was his eyes that caught her attention. They were kind eyes, the color of warm honey, and when they met hers, he nodded respectfully. "Morning, ma'am," he said quietly. Rebecca blinked in surprise. "Ma'am?" Nobody in this town had called her that in weeks. Most people avoided speaking to her altogether. "Good morning," she replied cautiously. "Can I help you?" "Need some new work shirts. These ones are about done for." He gestured to his faded chambray shirt, which indeed showed its age in the frayed collar and thin elbows. "I can help with that. Let me get the measuring tape." As Rebecca measured his shoulders and arms, she noticed how still he stood, patient and calm. Most men fidgeted during fittings, but not this one. His name was Daniel Carson, she learned, though everyone called him Danny. He was the foreman at the Double C Ranch, about 5 miles outside of town. "How many shirts do you need?" she asked, writing down his measurements. 3 should do. Nothing fancy. Just sturdy cotton that can take hard work. I can have them ready in a week. Danny nodded and paid the deposit without haggling over the price. As he turned to leave, he touched the brim of his hat. "Thank you, ma'am. Appreciate your help." That simple courtesy stayed with Rebecca long after he left. In a town where people looked through her like she was invisible, this cowboy had treated her like a person, like she mattered. A week later, Danny returned for his shirts. Rebecca had done her best work on them, making sure every seam was straight and strong. He tried one on right there in the store, and it fit perfectly. "Fine work," he said approvingly. "Real fine work. Thank you." He paid the balance and seemed about to leave when he paused. "Ma'am, if you don't mind my asking, when's your baby due?" Rebecca's hand instinctively went to her belly. She was 8 months along now, and the baby was impossible to hide. "Next month, I think. Maybe late October." Danny nodded thoughtfully. "You got family here? Anyone to help when the time comes?" The question was asked with such genuine concern that Rebecca felt her throat tighten. No, no family. But I'll manage. Something flickered in his eyes, understanding maybe, or sympathy. He nodded again and left, and Rebecca thought that would be the end of it. But 3 days later, he came back. This time he carried a basket covered with a checkered cloth. My hens are laying more eggs than I know what to do with, he said, setting the basket on the counter. Thought you might could use them. Rebecca lifted the cloth to find 24 fresh eggs nestled in straw. Her eyes stung with unexpected tears. Eggs were expensive, and she'd been rationing carefully. I can't accept this, she said, though her heart ached at the thought of refusing. Sure you can. Like I said, the hens are going crazy. Be doing me a favor, really. Can't let good eggs go to waste. They both knew he was being charitable, but he said it in a way that let her keep her dignity. Rebecca accepted the basket with trembling hands. Thank you. Thank you so much. After that, Danny started coming by regularly, always with some excuse. The garden at the ranch had too many tomatoes. Someone had given him extra flour, and it would go bad if he didn't share it. He'd found this old rocking chair in the barn. Didn't need it, but thought maybe she could use it for the baby. Rebecca began to look forward to his visits. He never stayed long, never asked prying questions about her situation. He just treated her with quiet respect and kindness. In a world that had shown her so much cruelty, his gentle consideration felt like water in a desert. Other people in town noticed, of course. They always noticed everything. That Carson fellow is soft in the head, Mrs. Henderson said loudly at the post office, making sure Rebecca could hear, wasting his time and money on that woman. But Danny didn't seem to care what people thought. He kept coming, kept bringing small gifts, kept treating Rebecca like she deserved kindness. One afternoon in early October, he brought her a chair he'd made himself. It was beautiful. Smooth wood, perfect joints, clearly crafted with skill and care. For the baby, he explained. Every child needs a good chair. Rebecca ran her hand over the armrest, overwhelmed. You made this? Yes, ma'am. Woodworking's a hobby of mine. Helps clear my head after long days. It's beautiful. But Danny, you've given me so much already. Why are you doing all this? He looked at her directly then, his honest eyes holding hers. Because it's the right thing to do. You're in a hard spot and you could use a friend. Simple as that, people talk, she said quietly. I don't want to cause you trouble. Let them talk. I've never put much stock in gossip. As October wore on and Rebecca's due date approached, she learned more about Danny from their brief conversations. He'd been married once 3 years ago. His wife, Catherine, had died from influenza during a bad winter. They'd been trying to have a baby when she got sick. He'd wanted children desperately, had always imagined himself as a father. Lost her in the dream of a family in one blow, he said one day, his voice heavy with old grief. Some days that ranch feels mighty empty. Rebecca understood loss. Different circumstances, but the same aching loneliness. I'm sorry, she said. That must have been so hard. Life throws us curves sometimes. We just have to figure out how to keep swinging. He asked about her too, but never pushed when she hesitated to share details. She told him small truths, that she'd grown up in Colorado, that her parents were gone, that she'd come to Wyoming hoping for a fresh start. She didn't tell him about the man who'd lied to her, who'd left her pregnant and alone. Some stories were too painful to share. What amazed Rebecca most was how Danny never judged her. He must have known she wasn't really a widow. The whole town knew by now. But he never brought it up, never made her feel ashamed. He just saw a woman who needed help and offered it freely. The ranch owner's wife, Mrs. Cooper, came into the store one day while Danny was there. She was an elegant woman in her 50s, kind-faced and well-dressed. She watched Danny chatting with Rebecca, noting how he made her laugh with a story about a stubborn calf. After he left, Mrs. Cooper approached the counter. Danny Carson is a good man, she said. One of the best I've ever known. My husband says he's the most honest, hard-working foreman we've ever had. Rebecca nodded, unsure where this was going. He's been alone too long, Mrs. Cooper continued. Grief nearly broke him when Catherine died. But lately he seems lighter somehow, happier. I think that's your doing. Rebecca felt her cheeks warm. He's just being kind, maybe so. But kindness can grow into something more if you let it. Mrs. Cooper smiled gently. Don't let the small minds in this town make you think you don't deserve happiness, dear. Everyone deserves a second chance. Those words stayed with Rebecca. Could she deserve happiness? Could someone like Danny really care for someone like her? The thought seemed impossible, yet her heart whispered dangerous hopes. As her baby's arrival drew near, Rebecca felt less alone than she had in months. She still faced the town's judgment, still endured the whispers and cold shoulders, but now she had one friend, one person who saw her as human and worthy of kindness. She had no way of knowing that Danny Carson was falling in love with her, that he lay awake nights thinking about her courage, her strength, her gentle way of mothering the child she hadn't even met yet, that he was already imagining a future he barely dared to hope for. The autumn air grew crisp, leaves turned gold and red, and Rebecca's baby dropped lower, preparing for birth. Change was coming in more ways than one. The story was far from over. It was only just beginning. The pain started just before midnight on October 23rd. Rebecca woke from restless sleep to a tightening across her belly that took her breath away. She lay still in the darkness, counting seconds until it passed. When the next contraction came 20 minutes later, she knew the time had come. Her baby was coming. Fear and excitement battled in her chest as she lit the lamp with shaking hands. She'd prepared as much as she could. Clean sheets were folded on the chair. Towels were stacked nearby. A basin of water waited by the bed. But preparing supplies and actually giving birth were two very different things. The contractions grew closer together as the night wore on. By 2 a.m, Rebecca knew she couldn't do this alone. She needed help, no matter how much she dreaded asking for it. She made her way slowly down the stairs, gripping the railing with each contraction. Old Henry, the hardware store owner, lived in the back of his shop. She knocked on his door, apologizing for waking him. Henry, bless him, didn't hesitate. "I'll fetch Mrs. Henderson," he said. "She's the midwife. You get back upstairs and wait." Mrs. Henderson, of all people, it had to be her. But Rebecca had no choice. Mrs. Henderson was the only midwife in Crow's Ridge. The older woman arrived 30 minutes later, her medical bag in hand and a sour expression on her face. She climbed the stairs heavily, making her displeasure known with every step. "Well," she said, looking around the small room, "let's see what we're dealing with." She examined Rebecca roughly, without gentleness or reassurance. "You've got hours yet. First babies always take their time." Those hours were the longest of Rebecca's life. The pain came in waves, each one stronger than the last. Mrs. Henderson sat in the corner, knitting and offering no comfort. Between contractions, Rebecca could hear her muttering. Bringing a child into the world like this. No father, no family. What kind of life is that? Rebecca bit her lip, refusing to respond. She focused on breathing, on getting through each contraction. As dawn broke and the pain intensified, Mrs. Henderson's comments grew crueler. "This baby's going to carry shame all his life," she said, her knitting needles clicking. "Everyone in town will know what he is. Children will tease him. Doors will close to him. All because of your choices, please." Rebecca gasped between contractions. "Please don't. I'm just speaking truth. Someone needs to. You should have thought about this baby before you spread your legs for a man who wasn't your husband." The words cut deeper than the physical pain. Rebecca turned her face to the wall, tears streaming down her cheeks. This woman was supposed to help her, support her through the most vulnerable moment of her life. Instead, she was making it unbearable. Outside, rain began to fall. Thunder rumbled in the distance. The autumn storm Mrs. Henderson had mentioned was arriving, matching the turmoil inside the little room. By noon, Rebecca was exhausted. The contractions were coming fast now, almost on top of each other. Mrs. Henderson finally set down her knitting and moved to the bedside. "Time to push," she said shortly. "This won't be easy, but you brought it on yourself." Rebecca pushed with everything she had. The pain was beyond anything she'd imagined. She screamed, not caring who heard, focusing only on bringing her baby safely into the world. "Push harder," Mrs. Henderson commanded. "Come on now, you made this baby, you can birth it." One more push, then another. And suddenly a new sound filled the room. The sharp, beautiful cry of a newborn. "It's a boy," Mrs. Henderson said, her voice flat and unimpressed. Rebecca's arms reached out instinctively. "Let me see him, please." Mrs. Henderson cleaned the baby with quick, efficient movements. When she finally placed him in Rebecca's arms, the world stopped. Nothing else mattered, not the pain, not the shame, not the cruel words. Only this tiny, perfect person who gazed up at her with unfocused eyes. Hello, Rebecca whispered, touching his soft cheek. Hello, my sweet boy. I'm your mama. Love flooded through her, so powerful it hurt. This was her son, her child, and she would die before she let the world break him. Mrs. Henderson was cleaning up, gathering her supplies. You'll need a birth certificate, she said. I'll need to file it with the county. Yes, Rebecca said, unable to look away from her baby's face. What do I need to do? Father's name, for one thing. Rebecca's chest tightened. There is no father. Not one I can name. Mrs. Henderson's laugh was harsh. Of course there isn't, so we'll leave it blank. Everyone will know what that means. Everyone will know he's illegitimate. Please, Rebecca begged, isn't there another way? Another way? To hide what you did? No, girl, there isn't. This baby is Well, the law has names for children like this, born out of wedlock. No father willing to claim him. He'll carry that mark his whole life. Rebecca clutched her son closer. Don't call him that, please. I'll call truth what it is. I won't put my name on papers that pretend this situation is anything other than what it is, sinful and shameful. This child is going to grow up knowing what his mother did, knowing he wasn't wanted enough for his father to stay. He is wanted, Rebecca said fiercely. I want him. I love him. Love won't change the facts, won't change what's written in the record books, won't change how people treat him. Mrs. Henderson packed the last of her supplies. I'll file the birth certificate next week. No father listed. Just your name and the word illegitimate stamped across it. There has to be another way, Rebecca whispered, but Mrs. Henderson was already heading for the door. Pay me $2 for my services. Leave it with Henry downstairs. And then she was gone, leaving Rebecca alone with her newborn son and a heart full of despair. The storm outside intensified. Rain lashed against the window. Rebecca held her baby close, rocking him gently as he nursed for the first time. His tiny hand gripped her finger with surprising strength. I'm so sorry, she whispered to him. I'm sorry you're coming into a world that's already decided to judge you. But I promise you this, I will love you enough for 10 parents. I will work my fingers to the bone to give you everything you need. You are not unwanted. You are not a mistake. You are my blessing, my miracle, my reason for everything. The baby's eyes drifted closed, satisfied and sleepy. Rebecca studied every inch of him. His tiny nose, his perfect ears, the way his lips pursed even in sleep. She'd never known it was possible to love someone this much, this instantly, this completely. But even as she held him, Mrs. Henderson's words echoed in her mind. The birth certificate, the blank space where a father's name should be, the mark of illegitimacy that would follow her son forever. How could she protect him from that? How could she shield him from a judgment he didn't deserve? Rebecca looked out the window at the stormy afternoon. Somewhere in this town, Danny Carson was probably working on the ranch, unaware that her baby had been born, unaware of the crisis she faced. She thought about his kindness, his quiet strength, the way he'd treated her with respect when no one else would. But she couldn't ask anything more of him. He'd already done so much. Still, as the rain continued to fall and her son slept in her arms, Rebecca found herself praying. Not for herself, but for her child. She prayed that somehow, some way, her son would have a chance at a normal life, that someone might care enough to help them. She had no idea that her prayers were already being answered. That even now, news of the baby's birth was spreading through town. That Danny Carson would hear about Mrs. Henderson's cruelty within hours, and that he was about to make a decision that would change all their lives forever. The storm raged on outside, but inside the small room, Rebecca held her son and hoped against hope that tomorrow might bring better news. That was all she could do. Hope, love her baby, and try to be strong enough for both of them. The breaking point had come and passed. Now something new was about to begin. 2 days after her son was born, Rebecca heard footsteps on the stairs outside her room. Heavy, deliberate footsteps that stopped at her door. A gentle knock followed. Miss Rebecca? It's Danny Carson. Can I come in? Rebecca looked down at herself. Still, in her nightgown, her hair unbrushed, the baby sleeping in the cradle beside her bed. She wasn't fit for visitors. But something in his voice made her call out, "Just a moment." She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and sat up in bed, trying to look more presentable than she felt. "Come in." Danny entered, hat in his hands, his face serious. He'd brought something, a wooden box that he set gently on the small table. More supplies from the ranch, he explained. Mrs. Cooper sent food, some chicken soup, fresh bread, dried apples. She figured you could use help with meals right now. That's very kind. Thank her for me. Danny nodded, but he didn't leave. Instead, he pulled the chair closer to the bed and sat down, his hat resting on his knee. His eyes found the cradle, and his expression softened. May I? Rebecca nodded, and Danny stood to look at the sleeping baby. She watched his face carefully, saw genuine tenderness there as he gazed down at her son. He's perfect, Danny said quietly. Just perfect. What's his name? I haven't decided yet. I keep trying different names, but none of them feel right. Danny returned to the chair, but now his expression had changed. The softness was gone, replaced by something harder. Anger, maybe, or determination. I heard what happened, he said. What Mrs. Henderson said during the birth, and after. Rebecca's cheeks burned with shame. News travels fast in small towns, old Henry told me. He was upset about it, said she had no right to talk to you that way, treat you that way. He wanted someone to know. It doesn't matter. It's done. It does matter. Danny leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. Rebecca, I know about the birth certificate, about how she's planning to file it, about what she's going to put on there. Rebecca felt tears prick her eyes. I can't stop her. That's the law. No father means. It means everyone will know. My son will grow up with that mark against him. People will treat him differently. They'll say terrible things. Not if he has a father's name on that certificate. Rebecca looked up sharply. What? Danny met her eyes steadily. I've been thinking about this for 2 days. Since I heard what happened, and I've made up my mind. I want to marry you, Rebecca. I want to give your son my name. The room seemed to tilt. Rebecca stared at him, certain she'd misheard. You. What? I'm asking you to marry me. Not because I pity you, though I hate seeing you hurt. Not because I'm trying to be some kind of hero, but because it's the right thing to do, and because I want a family. You need protection and respect. Your son deserves a father's name and a fair start in life. I can give you both those things. Rebecca's mind reeled. Danny, you don't have to do this. You don't owe us anything. I know I don't have to. I want to. He spoke with that calm certainty she'd come to recognize. I've been alone 3 years now. 3 years of rattling around. That empty house at the ranch, eating supper by myself, having nobody to talk to at the end of a long day. I wanted children with Catherine. We'd planned on a whole houseful. When she died, I thought that dream died too. He looked at the cradle again, then back at Rebecca. But maybe it doesn't have to. That baby needs a father. You need a husband. And I need a family. Seems to me we could help each other. But you barely know me, Rebecca protested. And Danny, I'm not the innocent victim here. I made choices. Bad choices. I fell for a man's lies and I got pregnant. This is my fault. You loved someone who turned out to be unworthy of you. That's not a crime, Rebecca. It's just life being hard and people being cruel. We all make mistakes. That doesn't mean you deserve to be punished forever. And your son sure doesn't deserve it. Rebecca's hands trembled. What would you want from me? From this marriage? Danny was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. I'd want a wife, a partner, someone to build a life with. I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give. We can take our time, get to know each other proper. I've got a house on the ranch, 3 bedrooms, a real kitchen, a porch that faces the sunset. There's room for all of us. What would people say? They'd talk even more than they already do. Let them talk, I don't give a damn what they say. His voice was firm. I know who I am. I know what's right. And this is right. But what do you get out of this? Really? Danny smiled then, a small, genuine smile. I get to be a father. I get someone to come home to. I get a wife who's strong enough to survive what you've survived. Kind enough to love a baby the world's already decided to judge. That's a lot more than most men get. Rebecca looked at her son, sleeping peacefully in his cradle. He was so small, so vulnerable. Everything she did from now on would affect his entire life. Was this the right choice? Could she really marry a man she barely knew? But then, what other choice did she have? Without a father's name, her son would be marked forever. He'd face discrimination, cruelty, closed doors. Danny was offering him a chance at a normal life. "I don't love you," she said bluntly. "I'm sorry, but I need to be honest. I don't. I know. And that's all right. Love can grow, if we give it time. Right now, I'm just asking for a chance. A chance to prove I can be a good husband and father. A chance for us to build something together. And if it doesn't work, if we can't make it work, then we'll deal with that when we come to it. But I think we're both stronger than we know. I think we could make a real good team, you and me." Rebecca's mind raced through all the reasons to say no. She'd be trapping him in a marriage he might regret. She'd be lying to herself and to him about her feelings. She'd be using him to solve her problems. But then she thought about Mrs. Henderson's cruel words, about the birth certificate with its damning blank space, about her son growing up ashamed of his own existence. "I need time to think," she said. "Of course. Take all the time you need. When would you want an answer?" "Whenever you're ready." "But Rebecca—" He stood up, settling his hat back on his head. "Mrs. Henderson's planning to file that birth certificate next week. Once it's filed, it's permanent. If we're going to do this, we need to do it before then." After he left, Rebecca sat in silence, listening to her son's soft breathing. The decision before her felt impossibly heavy. Old Henry came up later with her supper, more food from the ranch courtesy of Mrs. Cooper. As he set it down, he cleared his throat. "Danny Carson's a good man," he said. "Best I've known in my 70 years. He's honest, hard-working, and his word is gold. If he's made you an offer, you can trust it's genuine. But is it fair to him? To marry someone out of duty?" Henry smiled. "Girl, I've seen how that man looks at you. It's not just duty. Maybe he doesn't say it fancy, but Danny's halfway in love with you already, has been for weeks." Could that be true? Rebecca thought back over their conversations, his kindness, the way his eyes softened when he looked at her. Maybe Henry was right. That night, Rebecca lay awake long after her son's midnight feeding. She thought about her choices, her son's future, and the quiet cowboy who'd offered them both a lifeline. By morning, she'd made her decision. When Danny came by to check on her the next day, she asked him to sit down. "I've thought about your offer," she said, her voice steady despite her nerves. "If you're truly sure about this, if you really want to do this, then yes, I'll marry you." Relief flooded Danny's face. "You're sure?" "I'm sure. For my son's sake, for your sake, and for mine. We'll try our best to make this work." Danny stood and held out his hand. Rebecca took it and they shook on it like business partners sealing a deal. But when his rough, warm hand closed around hers, Rebecca felt something she hadn't expected. Hope. "I'll go to the courthouse today," Danny said. "We can get married tomorrow. Simple ceremony, just the paperwork. Then I'll file the birth certificate with my name on it before Mrs. Henderson can file hers." "That fast?" "No point waiting. The sooner we do this, the sooner your son has the protection of my name." Rebecca nodded, her heart pounding. Tomorrow she'd be a married woman. Tomorrow her son would have a father. Tomorrow everything would change. She just prayed they were all strong enough to handle what came next. The courthouse wedding took place on a Friday morning, just 5 days after Rebecca's son was born. She wore her best dress, a simple blue cotton that she'd let out at the seams to fit her post-pregnancy body. Her hands shook as she pinned her hair up, trying to look presentable for her own wedding. This wasn't how she'd imagined getting married. No white dress, no flowers, no family watching with proud tears. Just a practical arrangement at the county courthouse with a man she barely knew. Yet somehow it felt right, or at least it felt necessary. Danny arrived at her room precisely at 9 o'clock, dressed in his Sunday clothes. He looked different, cleaned up, younger somehow, and nervous. That nervousness made Rebecca feel a little better. At least she wasn't the only one scared. Ready? He asked. Rebecca looked at her son, sleeping peacefully in his cradle. Mrs. Cooper had agreed to watch him during the brief ceremony. As ready as I'll ever be. The courthouse was quiet that morning. Judge Morrison, a stern man with white whiskers, reviewed their paperwork with careful attention. He looked at Rebecca's condition, then at Danny, his eyebrows raised. You understand this is a legal binding contract? He asked Danny. You'll be taking on this woman and her child as your full responsibility. Yes, sir. I understand completely. And you, Miss Mitchell? You're entering this marriage of your own free will? Rebecca nodded. Yes, Your Honor. The judge studied them both for another long moment, then shrugged. Very well. Let's proceed. 2 ranch hands from the Double C served as witnesses. Old Pete and young Billy, both loyal to Danny and willing to keep their mouths mostly shut about the hasty wedding. They stood awkwardly to the side, hats in hands, as the judge began the simple ceremony. The words seemed to float past Rebecca. Love, honor, cherish, in sickness and health till death do you part. Big promises for 2 people who were basically strangers. When it came time for the rings, Danny produced 2 simple gold bands. Nothing fancy, but real gold nonetheless. They were my grandparents', he explained quietly as he slipped one onto her finger. My grandmother wanted me to have them when I got married again. Said they brought her and Grandpa 50 happy years. The ring was slightly too big, but Rebecca didn't care. She took the other band and slipped it onto Danny's finger, surprised by how intimate the gesture felt. This man was now her husband. They were bound together, for better or worse. I now pronounce you man and wife, Judge Morrison declared. You may kiss the bride if you're so inclined. Danny looked at Rebecca, a question in his eyes. She nodded slightly, and he leaned in to press a gentle, respectful kiss to her cheek. Not her lips, he was giving her space even in this moment. Gratitude washed over her. After signing the marriage certificate, they went directly to the birth registry office in the same building. This was the real reason for the rush. Getting Danny's name on her son's birth certificate before Mrs. Henderson could file her version. The clerk, a bored-looking woman named Miss Phillips, barely looked up as they approached. Help you? We need to file a birth certificate, Danny said. For our son, born October 23rd, our son. The words hung in the air. Rebecca watched Miss Phillips write down the information Danny provided. Mother's name? Rebecca Carson. The new name sounded strange in Rebecca's ears. Father's name? Daniel James Carson. That's me. Child's name? Danny looked at Rebecca. They hadn't discussed this. What would you like to name him? He asked gently. Rebecca had been thinking about it for days. Thomas, she said. Thomas Daniel Carson. Danny's face showed surprise, then pleasure. After me? You're his father now. It seems right. Something warm passed between them in that moment. A connection, an understanding. They were in this together now, for real. Miss Phillips finished the paperwork without any suspicion or comment. She had no idea that just down the street, Mrs. Henderson was probably preparing her own version of this certificate, ready to mark the baby as illegitimate. But she'd be too late. Thomas was legally Danny's son now. The law recognized it. That was all that mattered. When they left the courthouse as husband and wife, the autumn sun was shining bright. Danny offered Rebecca his arm, and she took it, feeling the solid strength of him beside her. We should get you and the baby home, he said. Home to the ranch, I mean, if you're up for the ride. The ranch? Rebecca had been so focused on the paperwork that she hadn't thought about what came next. That's where we live now. I've got the house all ready for you. Mrs. Cooper helped me prepare. We set up the nursery in the small bedroom, got fresh linens on the bed, stocked the kitchen. It's all ready. The reality of her new life was hitting her. She'd be leaving this small room above the hardware store, leaving town, starting completely over at the ranch. With a husband she barely knew and a 5-day-old baby. Give me an hour to pack my things, she said. Take all the time you need. I'll get the wagon ready and collect the baby from Mrs. Cooper. An hour later, Rebecca stood in her little room one last time. Everything she owned fit in 2 small bags. Not much to show for 24 years of life. But she was leaving with more than she'd arrived with. A husband, a name, and hope for a better future. The wagon ride to the ranch took 40 minutes. Rebecca sat beside Danny on the bench seat, holding baby Thomas wrapped in blankets. The countryside rolled past, golden autumn grass, distant mountains, endless sky. It was beautiful in a stark, lonely way. Danny pointed out landmarks as they drove. That's where the property line starts. Those are the Cooper's cattle in that pasture. See that creek? It runs year-round, never dries up even in summer. The ranch house appeared over a small rise. It was bigger than Rebecca had expected. A solid 2-story farmhouse with a wraparound porch and a stone chimney. Smoke curled from that chimney, welcoming. Mrs. Cooper's been keeping the fire going, Danny explained. Wanted the house warm for you and the baby. He pulled the wagon up to the porch and helped Rebecca down carefully, mindful of her recent childbirth. She was still sore, still healing, but the worst was past. Inside, the house was everything Danny had promised. Clean, spacious, furnished with simple but sturdy pieces. The kitchen had a real cookstove and a pump for water. The living room had comfortable chairs and that promised fireplace. Upstairs, 3 bedrooms waited. Danny carried her bags to the largest bedroom. This is the master bedroom. It's yours. I'll take the room down the hall. Rebecca looked at him in surprise. We're not. Not until you're ready. Might be never, might be someday. That's up to you. I told you we'd take this slow and I meant it. He showed her the nursery next, the smallest bedroom painted a cheerful yellow. The cradle from her old room was already there, along with the chair he'd made and all the baby supplies they'd accumulated. Fresh curtains hung at the window. Mrs. Cooper did most of this, Danny admitted. I'm not much for decorating, but I helped with the painting. It's perfect, Rebecca said, and meant it. Mrs. Cooper herself arrived an hour later, bringing a hot casserole for dinner and her warm, no-nonsense presence. She took the baby from Rebecca's arms without asking, cooing at him like he was the most precious thing in the world. Welcome home, she said to Rebecca. I'm so glad Danny found you. This house has needed a family. Thank you for everything you've done, Rebecca said. The nursery, the food, watching Thomas this morning. Oh, honey, that's what neighbors do. We help each other. She looked around the kitchen approvingly. Now you just had a baby. You need rest. I've prepared meals for the next week. They're in the cold box. Danny knows where everything is. You just focus on healing and taking care of this little one. After Mrs. Cooper left, Rebecca and Danny stood in the kitchen, suddenly awkward with each other. Married but strangers. Living together but separate. I usually eat supper around 6, Danny said. But we can change that if you need a different schedule. 6 is fine. I'll be working most days until dark. If you need anything, ring the bell on the back porch. Someone will hear and come help. All right. An uncomfortable silence stretched between them. Finally, Thomas started fussing, breaking the tension. Rebecca excused herself to feed him, grateful for something to do. She went to the master bedroom and closed the door, sitting in the rocking chair by the window. As she nursed her son, she looked out at the ranch, stretching into the distance. This was her home now. That man downstairs was her husband. This was her life. It wasn't what she'd dreamed of as a girl. But dreams changed. Life changed you. And maybe, just maybe, this unexpected path would lead somewhere good. Thomas finished eating and dozed off, milk-drunk and satisfied. Rebecca held him close, breathing in his sweet baby smell. No matter what happened with Danny, no matter how awkward things were, she'd done right by her son. He had a name. He had a home. He had a father willing to claim him. That night, lying alone in the big master bed, Rebecca heard Danny moving around in the room down the hall. Getting ready for bed, settling in. Her husband. They were under the same roof, sharing a life bound together by law and circumstance. She touched the gold ring on her finger, feeling its unfamiliar weight. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new adjustments. But for tonight, she let herself feel something she hadn't felt in months. Safe. For the first time in a long time, Rebecca felt safe. The first morning in her new home, Rebecca woke to silence. Not the town sounds she'd grown used to. No wagon wheels on the street, no voices calling to each other, no store bells ringing. Just quiet, broken only by birds singing and the distant sound of cattle. Thomas was still asleep in his cradle beside her bed. Rebecca dressed quickly and went downstairs, unsure what to expect. Danny was already gone. A note on the kitchen table read, "Out with the cattle. Coffee still warm on the stove. Help yourself to anything you need." The thoughtfulness of the warm coffee touched her. He'd thought about her comfort before heading out to work. Rebecca poured herself a cup and looked around the kitchen that was now hers. It felt strange. Everything felt strange. The first few weeks were the hardest. Rebecca and Danny circled each other like cautious animals, polite but distant. He worked long hours on the ranch, coming home tired and dusty. She cared for Thomas and tried to learn her way around the house and the rhythms of ranch life. They ate dinner together each evening, making awkward small talk. "How was your day?" Rebecca would ask. "Fine." "Good. Fixed the fence in the north pasture. One of the horses threw a shoe. That's good. I mean, not about the shoe, but the fence." Silence would fall, broken only by the sound of forks on plates. At night, they retreated to separate rooms. Danny never pushed, never tried to claim the husband's rights that law and custom said were his. He kept his distance, and Rebecca was grateful. She wasn't ready for that kind of closeness with him. Might never be ready. But slowly, things began to shift. It started small. One morning, Rebecca came downstairs to find Danny at the stove frying eggs. "Thought you might like a hot breakfast," he said. "You've been up half the night with the baby. Least I can do is cook." The eggs were a bit overdone, but Rebecca ate them gratefully. "Thank you." "You didn't have to, I know, but I wanted to." Another day, Rebecca was hanging laundry when a sudden rainstorm blew in. Before she could gather the clothes, Danny was there, helping her snatch them from the line before they got soaked. They ran for the porch, laughing despite themselves, and for a moment it felt almost natural. Almost easy. Thomas helped break down the walls between them. Danny was surprisingly gentle with the baby. He'd come in from work, wash up, and ask to hold him. Rebecca would watch Danny rock her son, singing old cowboy songs in his deep voice, and something in her chest would tighten. "My daddy used to sing that one," Danny said one evening, noticing her watching. "He'd sing it to me and my brothers when we were small. Before he died." "How old were you?" 12. "Old enough to have to become a man too fast." He looked down at Thomas. "I promised myself if I ever had kids, I'd stick around. Be there for them. Teach them things, you know." "You're good with him," Rebecca said softly. "He's a good baby." Makes it easy. These small moments accumulated like snow, layer upon layer, building something new between them. One evening, Rebecca came downstairs to find Danny at the kitchen table, a piece of wood and his carving knife in hand. He was making something, his brow furrowed in concentration. "What are you working on?" she asked. He held up a small wooden horse, roughly carved but recognizable. "Toy for Thomas. Figured when he gets bigger, he'll want something to play with." Rebecca sat down across from him, watching his hands work the wood. "Where did you learn to do that?" "Taught myself, mostly. Helps me think. When Catherine died, I'd come out here after dark and just carve. Kept my hands busy so my mind wouldn't get stuck in dark places." It was the first time he'd really talked about his late wife. Rebecca felt honored that he'd share it. What was she like? Danny was quiet for a long moment, his knife pausing. Kind, real kind. Saw the good in everybody. She loved animals, used to nurse injured birds back to health. We met at a church social. She was new in town, didn't know anybody. I was shy as anything, but she smiled at me and that was it. "I was done for. You must miss her. I do. Probably always will, but..." He looked up at Rebecca. "I'm learning that missing someone and moving forward aren't opposites. You can do both. You can honor what was while building something new." Rebecca understood. She'd been thinking the same thing about her own past. "Can I ask you something?" Danny said. "Of course, the man who, Thomas's birth father. Did you love him?" Rebecca had been waiting for this question. She'd decided weeks ago that she'd tell Danny the truth if he asked. "He deserved that much, I thought I did. He was charming, said all the right things. Told me he was single, that he wanted to marry me. I believed him completely." She twisted the ring on her finger. "Found out by accident he had a whole family back east, a wife, 3 children. I was just entertainment while he traveled for business. That's rough. When I confronted him, he didn't even apologize. Just said I should have been smarter, shouldn't have believed him. Then he left town and I never saw him again." Rebecca felt the old shame rising but pushed it down. "I know what people think. That I was loose, that I should have known better. Maybe they're right." "They're not right." Danny's voice was firm. "That man was a liar and a cheat. You trusted someone you thought was honest. That's not your fault." "That's his fault." Tears pricked Rebecca's eyes. "I wish more people saw it that way. Anyone worth knowing will see it that way." They sat in comfortable silence after that. Danny carving his horse and Rebecca mending one of his shirts. It felt almost domestic, almost like a real marriage. Winter arrived, bringing snow and cold winds. The ranch slowed down a bit, giving Danny more time at home. He taught Rebecca how to ride horses, patient with her nervousness and celebrating when she finally cantered on her own. He showed her around the property, introducing her to the ranch hands and explaining how everything worked. Mrs. Cooper became a regular visitor and a true friend. She taught Rebecca how to cook on the big ranch stove, how to preserve food, how to manage a household of this size. She never judged, never pried, just offered friendship and support. "You two are doing well," she said one afternoon, watching through the window as Danny showed Rebecca how to chop wood properly. "Better than I expected, honestly." "We're trying," Rebecca said. "That's all marriage is, honey. Two people trying. Some days are easier than others, but you keep trying." Thomas grew and thrived. By 3 months old, he was smiling and cooing, charming everyone who saw him. Danny doted on him, coming home from work and heading straight to wherever Thomas was. "There's my boy," he'd say, scooping him up. "Did you keep your mama busy today?" Rebecca noticed how naturally Danny said, "my boy." Not your son or the baby, but my boy. He'd claimed Thomas completely, in his heart as well as on paper. One snowy evening in December, the temperature dropped dangerously low. Danny came in from checking on the animals, stamping snow off his boots. "It's getting bad out there," he said. "Going to be a cold night." Around midnight, Rebecca woke to Thomas crying. But not his usual hungry cry, something was wrong. She picked him up and felt heat radiating from his small body. Fever. Her heart clenched with fear. She tried to soothe him, but he just cried harder. Without thinking, she carried him down the hall to Danny's room and knocked. He answered immediately, alert despite the hour. "What's wrong?" "It's Thomas. He's burning up." Danny was moving before she finished speaking, lighting a lamp and examining the baby. "How long has he been like this?" "I just noticed. Maybe he's been warm for a while, I don't know." "What do we do?" Danny's face was serious but calm. "We cool him down. Get some lukewarm water and cloths. I'll hold him." They worked together through the night, taking turns sponging Thomas with water, checking his temperature, trying to get him comfortable. The baby cried and fussed, clearly miserable. Rebecca fought panic, but Danny's steady presence kept her grounded. "He's going to be okay," Danny said. "Babies get fevers. We just have to help him through it. What if it's something serious? What if, don't borrow trouble? We'll deal with what is, not what might be." By dawn, Thomas's fever had broken. He nursed hungrily and fell into a peaceful sleep. Rebecca, exhausted and relieved, started crying. Danny pulled her into an awkward hug. "Hey, it's okay. He's okay. I was so scared," she sobbed into his chest. "I kept thinking about losing him and I couldn't bear it." "I know. I was scared too." His arms tightened around her. "But we got through it together. That's what family does. Family." The word hung in the air between them. Rebecca realized she was in her nightgown, standing in Danny's room, being held by her husband. It should have felt awkward or wrong, but it didn't. It felt safe. It felt right. She pulled back, wiping her eyes. "Thank you for being here, for helping. Where else would I be? He's my son. You're my wife. This is what I signed up for." Something shifted in that moment. The walls Rebecca had built around her heart cracked just a little. Danny wasn't just a man helping her out of duty. He genuinely cared. About Thomas, yes, but maybe about her too. As winter deepened, they grew closer. Small touches became normal. His hand on her back as they walked, her fixing his collar before he went to work. They laughed more, talked more. The awkward silences faded, replaced by comfortable quiet. One evening, sitting by the fire after Thomas was asleep, Danny said, "I'm glad you're here." Rebecca looked at him in surprise. "Really? Really? This house was dead after Catherine. I was just going through motions, waiting for, I don't know what." Spring arrived with wildflowers and warmer weather. Thomas was 5 months old, healthy and happy, reaching for everything with his chubby hands. Rebecca had settled into life on the ranch, finding her place and her purpose. The awkwardness with Danny had faded into something comfortable and warm. They weren't just roommates anymore, they were partners. Maybe even friends. When Mrs. Cooper suggested they attend the church social in town, Rebecca's first instinct was to refuse. She hadn't been back to Crow's Ridge since the wedding. The thought of facing those people again, enduring their whispers and judgment, made her stomach turn. "I don't think I'm ready," she told Danny that evening. He was fixing a broken chair leg at the kitchen table. He paused, looking up at her. "It's been months. Sooner or later we have to show our faces. Let people see we're a real family. They'll talk. You know they will. They're already talking. Might as well give them something real to talk about." He set down his tools. "Rebecca, I know it's hard, but we can't hide out here forever. Besides, Mrs. Cooper's right. It's good for Thomas to be around other people. Other children." Rebecca knew he was right, but that didn't make it easier. Still, she'd learned that Danny wouldn't push unless he thought it was important. If he thought they should go, she'd trust his judgment. "All right," she agreed. "We'll go." The church social was held on a beautiful Saturday afternoon in early May. The whole town would be there, families gathering for food, games, and fellowship. Rebecca dressed Thomas in his best outfit, a little suit Mrs. Cooper had made. She wore her nicest dress and tried to calm her racing heart. Danny drove them in the wagon, looking handsome in his Sunday clothes. As they neared town, he reached over and squeezed her hand. "We're together," he said simply. "Whatever happens, we're together." That simple touch, that promise, steadied her. The church lawn was already crowded when they arrived. Rebecca could feel eyes turning toward them immediately. The whispers started before they'd even climbed down from the wagon. "That's her, the Carson woman. Can you believe Danny married her? And that baby?" Danny helped Rebecca down, then reached for Thomas. He settled the baby in his arms with practiced ease and offered Rebecca his other arm. They walked across the lawn together, heads high. Mrs. Cooper rushed over immediately, her warm smile a relief. "There you are. I was worried you might not come. Oh, let me see this precious boy." She took Thomas from Danny, cooing over him and attracting other women. Some smiled genuinely at the baby. Others kept their distance, their faces pinched with disapproval. The afternoon progressed tensely. Rebecca stayed close to Danny, acutely aware of the mixed reception they were receiving. Some people were kind. Mr. Patterson from the store, old Henry from the hardware shop, several of the ranch hands and their families. But others made their feelings clear through cold shoulders and pointed looks. Mrs. Henderson was there, of course. She held court among the church ladies, her sharp eyes tracking Rebecca's every move. Rebecca tried to ignore her, focusing instead on the few friendly faces in the crowd. Thomas was fussy, probably picking up on his mother's tension. Rebecca walked him around the lawn, bouncing him gently and singing quietly. She'd wandered near the refreshment table when she heard Mrs. Henderson's voice loud enough to carry. "Such a shame," the older woman said to her circle of friends. "Danny Carson could have had his pick of decent women in this county. But he chose that one and saddled himself with another man's mistake." Rebecca froze, her face burning. Mrs. Henderson continued, not even bothering to lower her voice. "And that child. Well, we all know what he really is, no matter what name's on his birth certificate. The Carson boy, they call him. But we know the truth, don't we?" "Now, Helen," one of the other women said uncomfortably. "I'm just speaking facts. That baby's real parentage will come out eventually. These things always do. And when it does, that boy will learn what shame really means." Rebecca's hands trembled. She wanted to run, to grab Thomas and flee back to the safety of the ranch. But her feet wouldn't move. She just stood there frozen as Mrs. Henderson's cruel words washed over her. Then a deep voice cut through the crowd. "That's enough." Danny had appeared, his face harder than Rebecca had ever seen it. He wasn't loud, but his voice carried authority that made everyone fall silent. He walked straight to Mrs. Henderson, looking her directly in the eye. "Thomas is my son. He bears my name, he lives in my home, and he is loved and wanted. Anyone who suggests otherwise is lying." Mrs. Henderson straightened, affronted. "Well, you never what? Never spread gossip? Never judged people? Never showed Christian charity?" Danny's voice stayed calm, but there was steel underneath. "That baby didn't choose how he came into this world. He's innocent, and anyone who holds his circumstances against him is the one who should be ashamed, not him." A murmur ran through the crowd. Some people nodded in agreement. Others looked uncomfortable. Danny turned to address everyone gathered on the lawn. "My wife came to this town looking for a fresh start. She worked hard, kept to herself, and asked for nothing from anybody. But instead of kindness, she found judgment. Instead of welcome, she found cruelty." He moved to Rebecca's side, putting his arm around her shoulders. "Rebecca is my wife. Thomas is my son. We are a family, and I'll thank everyone here to treat us with the respect that any family deserves." He looked directly at Mrs. Henderson again, "Including you, especially you. You call yourself a Christian woman, but you showed my wife no mercy when she needed help most. You were cruel when you should have been kind. That's not faith, that's just meanness." Mrs. Henderson's face turned bright red. "How dare you?" "I dare because it's true, and everyone here knows it." Danny's voice softened slightly. "I'm not asking anyone to forget what happened. I'm just asking you to remember that we're all human. We all make mistakes, and we all deserve a chance at happiness." He took Thomas from Rebecca's arms and held him up slightly so everyone could see. "This is Thomas Daniel Carson. My son, look at him. He's just a baby. A sweet, innocent baby who smiles at everyone and doesn't have a mean bone in his body. How can any of you look at this child and see anything but a gift?" Silence hung over the lawn. Rebecca felt tears streaming down her face, but she didn't bother wiping them away. Danny had just defended her, defended Thomas in front of the entire town. He'd claimed them publicly, firmly, leaving no room for doubt. Finally, Mrs. Cooper stepped forward. "Danny's right. We should all be ashamed of ourselves. This family deserves better from us." She walked over and hugged Rebecca tightly. "I'm sorry, dear. So sorry for how you've been treated." One by one, other people stepped forward. Not everyone. Mrs. Henderson and her closest friends remained stiffly apart. But enough people. The ranch hands and their wives. Young couples with children. Even the new preacher who hadn't been in town during all the early scandal. "Welcome," they said. "We're glad you're here." Danny turned to Rebecca. "You ready to go home?" She nodded, overwhelmed and exhausted. They said their goodbyes to Mrs. Cooper and the few friends they'd made, then walked back to the wagon. As Danny helped her up, she finally found her voice. "Thank you for what you said, for standing up for us, and you're my family. Of course I stood up for you." He climbed up beside her and took the reins. "Nobody gets to talk about my wife and son that way. Not while I'm breathing." The ride home was quiet, but it was a good quiet. Rebecca held Thomas close, processing everything that had happened. Danny had stood before the whole town and declared them his family. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to, because it was true. That night after Thomas was asleep, Rebecca found Danny on the front porch looking out at the stars. "Can't sleep?" she asked. "Just thinking." She sat down beside him on the porch swing. "About today? Yeah, I probably embarrassed you making a scene like that." "Embarrassed me?" "Danny, you defended me. You stood up for Thomas. You made me feel protected, valued. I've never had anyone fight for me like that." He turned to look at her. "You're my wife. That's what husbands do." "No," Rebecca said firmly. "That's what good husbands do. And you're a good man, Danny Carson. The best I've ever known." Something shifted in his expression. Hope, maybe, or tenderness. "Rebecca, I need to tell you something." "What?" "This marriage. When we started, it was supposed to be practical, a solution to a problem. But somewhere along the way, it became more than that. For me, anyway." He took a deep breath. "I've fallen in love with you. Maybe I started falling that first day in the store, I don't know. But I am. I'm in love with you." Rebecca's breath caught. She'd suspected maybe, but hearing him say it out loud was different. "You don't have to say anything back," Danny continued quickly. "I'm not expecting you to feel the same way. I just wanted you to know that when I stood up for you today, when I called you my wife, I meant it with my whole heart. You're not an obligation to me. You're not a duty. You're the woman I love." Rebecca's mind raced. Did she love him? She cared for him, certainly. Respected him. Was grateful to him. She enjoyed his company, felt safe with him, admired his character. But was that love? She thought about how her heart lifted when he came home from work, how she worried when he was out in bad weather, how his smile could brighten her whole day, how natural it felt to be a family with him. 2 years had passed since that spring day at the church social. The ranch house that had once felt too big and empty now rang with life and laughter. Thomas was a sturdy 2-year-old running everywhere on his little legs and getting into everything with the curiosity of a child who felt completely safe and loved. Papa, look." He ran across the yard toward Danny, holding up a feather he'd found. Danny scooped him up with one arm, examining the feather seriously. "That's a fine feather, son. Might be from a hawk. See how the colors change in the light?" Rebecca watched from the porch, one hand resting on her swollen belly. Their daughter was due any day now, and Rebecca was enormous and uncomfortable. But she was also happier than she'd ever imagined possible. The past 2 years had transformed everything. Her marriage to Danny had become real in every sense. They'd moved into the master bedroom together about 6 months after the church social, and their love had deepened into something strong and unshakable. He was her partner, her best friend, her lover, and the father of her children. Children. Plural. The thought still amazed her. Danny carried Thomas back to the porch, settling him on the step before kneeling beside Rebecca's chair. "How are you feeling?" "Any contractions? A few? Nothing regular yet. I think she's waiting for the right moment to make her entrance, just like her mother knows her own mind already." Danny smiled and kissed her forehead. "I'll stay close to the house today, just in case." The business had grown significantly over the past 2 years. Mr. Cooper had made Danny a full partner in the ranch, recognizing his skill and dedication. The house had been expanded too. Another bedroom added, the kitchen enlarged, a proper workshop built for Danny's woodworking. They'd even hired a young woman from town to help Rebecca with housework and cooking, especially now that she was so pregnant. Life was good. Better than good. It was everything Rebecca had stopped believing in during those dark days in the little room above the hardware store. Mrs. Cooper visited that afternoon, as she did most days. She'd become like a mother to Rebecca, filling the empty space Rebecca's own mother had left. She bustled into the kitchen with fresh bread and news from town. "Mrs. Henderson's moving," she announced. "Going to live with her daughter in Colorado. Leaving next month." Rebecca felt a complicated mix of emotions. Mrs. Henderson had never apologized for her cruelty, never acknowledged how wrong she'd been. But in the end, she'd become irrelevant. Her opinions didn't matter anymore. The town had moved on, accepted the Carson family, and Mrs. Henderson had found herself increasingly isolated. "I hope she finds happiness there," Rebecca said, and meant it. Holding grudges was exhausting, and she had too much joy in her life to waste energy on bitterness. "You're a better woman than me," Mrs. Cooper said. "I'd be dancing a jig to see her go." That evening, as the sun set in brilliant oranges and reds, the whole family sat on the porch. Danny had Thomas on his knee, teaching him to count the stars as they appeared. Rebecca rocked in her chair, feeling the baby move inside her. "Tell me story, Papa," Thomas demanded. He talked constantly now, his little voice always asking questions or making observations. "What kind of story?" "About when I was baby." Danny glanced at Rebecca, a question in his eyes. They'd talked about this moment, knowing it would come eventually. How much to tell Thomas about his early days? About the circumstances of his birth? Rebecca nodded. They'd decided on honesty, age-appropriate but honest. "Well," Danny began, "when you were just born, your mama needed help. She was all alone, and that's a scary thing when you have a tiny baby to care for. So I decided to help. Why? Because it was the right thing to do, and because I'd always wanted to be a papa. And here was this perfect little boy who needed one." Thomas thought about this seriously. "So you picked me?" "Yes, sir. I picked you. And I picked your mama. And we became a family. What if you didn't pick me?" Danny pulled Thomas close. "But I did pick you. That's what matters. And every single day since, I've been glad I did. You're the best son a man could ask for." Thomas seemed satisfied with this answer. "Tell more. When you were brand new, you had the tiniest hands I'd ever seen, and you'd grab my finger and hold on so tight, like you knew I was your papa already." Rebecca listened to Danny tell the story, tears in her eyes. He spoke about those early days with such love, such certainty. There was no shame in his telling, no hint that Thomas was anything other than completely wanted and chosen. This was the gift Danny had given her son, not just a name, but a narrative of love and belonging. Thomas would grow up knowing he was picked, chosen, celebrated. The circumstances of his birth would just be part of his story, not a definition of his worth. 3 days later, Rebecca went into labor just as the sun came up. This time was different from Thomas's birth. Danny was there, holding her hand and encouraging her. Mrs. Cooper was there too, having long since replaced Mrs. Henderson as the preferred midwife in the area. The young doctor from the next town over was on hand as well, just in case. The labor was shorter and easier than with Thomas. By mid-morning, their daughter entered the world with a strong, healthy cry. "She's beautiful," Danny breathed. tears streaming down his face as he held his daughter for the first time. Absolutely beautiful. They named her Catherine Rose Carson. Catherine after Danny's first wife, Rose after Rebecca's mother. It felt right to honor the women who'd come before, who'd shaped them into the people they'd become. Thomas was allowed in to meet his sister that afternoon. He approached cautiously, eyes wide. "Baby sister," he whispered. "She's so small." "You were that small once," Rebecca told him. "And Papa held you just like he's holding her now. Can I touch?" Gently, Thomas reached out one small finger and stroked Catherine's tiny hand. She immediately gripped his finger just as he'd once gripped Danny's. Thomas's face lit up with wonder. "She likes me." "Of course she does," Danny said. "You're her big brother. It's your job to protect her and teach her things." Thomas took this responsibility very seriously. From that day forward, he appointed himself Catherine's guardian. He'd bring her toys, sing to her in his off-key toddler voice, and report to anyone who'd listen about everything his sister did. The ranch continued to thrive. Word spread about the quality of their cattle and horses. Danny's reputation as an honest, skilled rancher brought business from all over the county. Rebecca started a small sewing business from home, creating custom pieces for women in town and neighboring areas. Between the two of them, they built a comfortable life. But more than the financial success, they built a family full of love and laughter. The house was always filled with noise. Thomas's chatter, Catherine's baby sounds, Danny's deep laugh, Rebecca's singing. They had Sunday dinners with Mrs. Cooper and her family. The ranch hands would often stay for supper, becoming part of their extended family. One evening, about 6 months after Catherine was born, Rebecca and Danny sat on the porch again. It had become their spot, the place where they'd shared so many important moments. Catherine slept in Rebecca's arms, and Thomas was already in bed, worn out from a day of helping Danny with the horses. "Do you ever think about how different things could have been?" Rebecca asked. "What do you mean?" "If you hadn't come into the general store that day, if you hadn't shown me kindness, if you hadn't made that incredible offer." She looked down at their daughter, then over at Danny. "Where would I be now? Where would Thomas be?" Danny was quiet for a moment. "I think about it sometimes. But then I realize it wasn't chance. It was meant to be. You were meant to come to Crow's Ridge. I was meant to walk into that store. We were meant to find each other." "You really believe that?" "I do. I think we saved each other, Rebecca. I was dying slowly, buried in grief and loneliness. You were drowning in shame and fear. We were both lost. But together we found our way home." Rebecca shifted Catherine to her shoulder, reaching for Danny's hand with her free one. "I love you. I don't tell you that enough, but I do. So much it scares me sometimes. I love you too. You, Thomas, Catherine, you're my whole world." They sat in comfortable silence, watching fireflies dance in the warm summer air. The ranch spread out before them, peaceful and prosperous. Inside the house, their son slept soundly, secure in the knowledge that he was loved and wanted. In Rebecca's arms, their daughter dozed, another miracle born from their unlikely union. It hadn't been the story Rebecca had imagined for herself. She'd dreamed of a different kind of romance once, passionate declarations and grand gestures. What she'd found instead was something better, something real. A love built on kindness, respect, patience, and genuine care. Danny had declared something important that day at the church social. "Not when he bears my name." It wasn't just about Thomas's last name or the words on a birth certificate. It was about identity, belonging, worth. Danny had claimed Thomas fully and completely, making him a Carson in every way that mattered. And in doing so, he'd claimed Rebecca too. He'd given her back her dignity, her hope, her future. He'd shown her what real love looked like. Not selfish and demanding, but generous and patient. Thomas would grow up knowing he was chosen, not born into obligation, but welcomed with open arms. He'd tell people proudly, "My papa picked me," and he'd mean it with his whole heart because it was true. Danny had picked him,